Welcome. I'm Tabitha from the George Memorial Library, and in this video, we'll learn about pivot tables in Microsoft Excel. First off, what is a pivot table? We can think of a pivot table like a report. Say you have a large data set with lots of categories and totals. A pivot table helps you group the data and analyze the relationship between entries in those categories. It makes it easy to filter and format data in a way to quickly and clearly express the conclusions drawn from it. For example, here on our sheet we have a table. Now, we don't have to have a table to make a pivot table. We can use any data set in a rectangular area, but having a table makes it easier to see how some of our data is already grouped. We have categories such as dates that these events happened, our client names, our employee names, the time they started, the time they ended, any time deducted for lunch, how many working hours there were, and how much the client was charged. Though it is fairly organized, a simple look at this table doesn't tell me which employee worked the longest. It doesn't easily tell me if a client had more interaction with one employee than the others, but we can use a pivot table to very quickly rearrange this data and get those types of answers. To make a pivot table, click on the Insert tab, and on the left, click Pivot Table. This box pops up asking for more details about the pivot table we're creating. Our first option is to select the data we want to analyze in our pivot table. In this case, because I had already clicked somewhere on the table named 2020 Invoice, the program suggests this data set. If this was not the data I wanted to use, I could type the name of another table here, or type a reference such as A3 through F30. We could also use an external data source. This means the data would come from outside of this particular workbook or document. To do that, I would need to know the file path to tell the computer where to pull this other data from. Our next option is to choose where to put the pivot table. It can be on a new worksheet, or it can be on a sheet that already exists in this document. In the case of the latter, we would tell it where on which sheet using a reference, but for now we're going to put this pivot table on a new page of its own. This is our blank sheet ready for our pivot table. Each of our column headings have become categories called fields over here on the right. Below that are 4 panels that let us control how our data is presented. These are row and column labels, values, and report filter. Putting any of the fields into these areas will display it on the pivot table. For instance, if I grab the client name field and drop it into the row labels panel, this will list out every unique entry in that category in order. In this case, they're words, so they're in alphabetical order. So we have each of our clients' names listed out one time in alphabetical order. If we look back at our chart, some of these clients appear more than once. Twain, for example. But over here, he only appears one time. The column panel is very similar, it's just sideways. If I drag the client names over to the columns, it still lists out each of my clients in alphabetical order, but each client gets their own column instead of their own row now. For now, I'm going to put it back where it was in the rows panel. The values panel only displays values. Even if that category lists words, this panel will only display numbers, so it's going to analyze the value of that category in some way. If we pull the employee name category down into the value panel, now it shows a count of employee name entries. Our client Austin had hired our services 4 times, but maybe I want to see which of my employees worked for each client. If we drag the employee name field into the column panel, now we still have one row for each client, but each employee also gets their own column. Then if we drop hours worked into the values panel, we can more easily see the relationship between the client and the employee. We get a count of hours worked. Count always counts entries, not the value of the entry. So this is showing how many times each employee worked for each client, not a total of how many hours. Here, Clark worked 2 times for Bronte. In total, Bronte hired our services 5 times, and Clark worked a total of 6 jobs. Our company had a grand total of 28 jobs. If we want to see a total of the hours worked, then we have to change the type of value in the values panel from count to sum, S-U-M. To do that, we'll click on the category in the values panel and choose Value Field Settings. Instead of count, we'll select sum. We see that our numbers changed. This is kind of difficult to comprehensively look at though, because Excel values hours a little differently than you might expect. Logically, 1 hour should have the value of 1, but you can work with multiple units of time in Excel: seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years. So the program has to have a baseline for which of those units equals 1. In Excel, 1 day has the value of 1, and since an hour is a fraction of a day, an hour has the value of a fraction of the number 1. There are 24 hours in a day, so 1 hour is 1 day divided by 24, or 1/24. We can have Excel do that math for us and display it in a way that's easy to understand. We'll just click on the category again, go back into Value Field Settings, and in the bottom left of this pop-up, we'll click Number Format. This second pop-up lists numbers that the program understands. An hour is a type of time, so we'll select that category, and on the right, we see a list of various ways of formatting time. We'll choose this bottom one because what we want to display is not a time of day. It's not AM or PM. It's a true total number of hours. So that's what this format is for, and that's why the example shows 37. It's not going to start over at 12 or at 24 like a clock would. After selecting our format, we'll click OK, then OK again. Now we can analyze this data more easily. Our employee Clark worked for Bronte for a total of 3.5 hours. She worked for Gray for a total of 7 hours, and she worked in total for 21 hours and 30 minutes. In total, my employees worked 149 hours for these clients. But maybe we don't want to see it so stretched out like this. Maybe it would be easier to see if we dropped the employee names down below the client names. Here we have everything relevant to Austin. She had a total of 24 hours of work performed. Then we have that itemized out. Here were the 4 employees who performed that work, and their individual totals. This is itemized out for each of our clients. We can also very easily just flip that around. Now each of our employees are listed, and beneath them it itemizes out which clients they worked for to receive that total. The last area in this pivot table that we'll talk about today is the Report Filter panel. This is for categories that we want to filter by, but we don't want to see itemized out. For example, let's drop the date category in that panel. We don't see each unique date itemized out in our table, but we get this header up here. Right now, all entries in our data set are displaying, but we'll click the filter and select only the 2nd of January. Click OK, and now we'll only see entries associated with that date. The grand total reflects this as well. The other data is still there, we can easily get it back. It's just, right now, all we asked to see was things that happened on January 2nd. Maybe we want to see events for multiple dates, so we'll go back into the filter header, and at the bottom of this list, we'll check the multiples box. Let's quickly select all these January dates. They're listed in chronological order. Now we can see our totals for January. So welcome to the world of pivot tables. Don't be afraid to rearrange the categories and see how your data can best be displayed. If you found this video informative, click the like button. Leave a comment about how this information helped you. Check out our channel. We have a growing repertoire of videos on a wide range of computer skills, life skills, and art skills. To see what we've got coming up, including interactive streaming programs, visit our calendar at fortbend.lib.tx.us/events. Thank you so much for watching.